The moon rose above the tall acacia trees, silver light pouring across the quiet village of Mbanza. Every night, when the wind softened and the drums fell silent, the people waited for Nala's voice to rise. She was young, barely 20, with skin the color of new earth after rain and eyes that carried both laughter and longing. When she sang, it felt as if the stars bent closer, listening. Children who had fought all day fell asleep to her melodies, and the elders who carried the weight of forgotten years found their hearts light again. Her song wove through the huts, through the cattle fields, through the sleeping river, until even the night birds stopped mid-flight to hear her. No one knew when her gift had begun. Some said she had swallowed a drop of moonlight as a baby. Others whispered that her mother had prayed to the river goddess for a child with a voice pure enough to heal sorrow. Nala never spoke of it. To her, singing was as natural as breathing. At dawn, she sang as she fetched water, her reflection rippling in the river's surface. At dusk, she sang to guide the fishermen home. And when night fell, she sang to the moon itself, long, low notes that trembled like silver threads across the sky. Her voice carried more than beauty, it carried peace. Quarrels in the village often ended when Nala began to sing. Lovers who had parted bitterly would listen from opposite sides of the square and find their anger fading. Even the animals seemed gentler in her presence. When she sang, the goats stopped bleating, the dogs lay down quietly, and the night insects softened their cries. It was said that her songs healed the spirit, though she asked for nothing in return. Men admired her, some for her grace, others for her kindness. But what truly held them captive was her voice. It stirred feelings they could not name. It wasn't lust or desire, but something deeper, something sacred. Her beauty was undeniable, yet it was her song that lived inside people's hearts long after she stopped singing. Young men brought her baskets of fruit and bracelets carved from bone, hoping for her smile, but Nala was not easily swayed. She belonged to the music, to the rhythm of the world itself. Sometimes she sang by the river alone, her feet in the cool water, her hair glistening with moonlight. Those who passed by swore they heard another voice, faint and distant, like the river answering her. Nala would close her eyes and smile, as if she knew secrets the rest of the world had forgotten. To her, each note was a prayer, each melody a thread tying her spirit to the earth and sky. She sang because it was the only way she knew to love, to breathe, to exist. And the moon, faithful listener that it was, seemed to hum back, promising that her gift would never fade, no matter what darkness the world might bring. Okoro was known across the lands for his strength and precision. He could strike a gazelle with a single spear from a distance where most men's aim would fail. The villagers admired his courage, the firmness of his stance, and the quiet authority in his deep voice. When he first met Nala, he had been enchanted not by her beauty but by the calm that surrounded her. Her laughter softened his hardened edges, and her songs, floating through the air like drifting petals, seemed to soothe the restless pulse that ruled his hunter's heart. To the village, their union was a story of balance. The hunter and the singer, power and peace walking hand in hand. In the beginning, Okoro wore his pride like armor. He would stand beside her as she sang, watching the villagers gather and sway to her melody. "That is my wife," he would say with quiet satisfaction, chest swelling as the people smiled. He believed her songs were his victory, proof that he had conquered beauty itself, that her voice was another trophy among the pelts and horns in his hut. But as the moons passed, pride began to shift its shape. Each time someone praised her voice, Okoro's smile tightened. Each compliment, once a jewel in his crown, started to feel like a thorn pressing against his skin. The praise that once fed him now left him hollow. When elders spoke of Nala's gift, they forgot to mention the hunter who had won her heart. When women sang her songs at the well, their husbands' eyes gleamed with longing not for her body but for her grace. Okoro's victories in the forest no longer stirred the same admiration. Spears broke, animals bled, yet no one sang of his hunts. Only Nala's voice filled their evenings. He began to hate the very things that once made him proud. The nights that once felt sacred became unbearable. While Nala sang to the moon, Okoro would lie awake, staring into the roof of their hut, listening to the melody that everyone adored. He could not escape it, it lingered even when she slept, woven into the air itself. The song he had once claimed as his joy became a haunting reminder that her light reached further than his shadow ever could. He tried to reason with himself, telling his heart that he loved her gift, that it was part of who she was. But envy is not reasoned with, it grows quietly, feeding on insecurity. Okoro began to imagine whispers, that Nala's songs were not for him but for someone else. When she smiled at strangers, he saw betrayal. When she sang, he heard defiance. The same wind that once carried her songs now mocked him, hissing her name through the trees. And though he still walked tall and carried his spear with pride, something inside him had begun to twist, slowly, silently, like a snake coiling around his heart, waiting for the moment to strike. That night, the moon hung larger than it had in months, a white disk spilling its cold light over the sleeping huts. The air was heavy with the scent of ripening fruit and burning wood. Crickets hummed in the grass, and from the distance Nala's voice rose like mist, soft, haunting, and alive. Her song floated between the trees, winding through the dark paths of the village, touching every ear that listened. Some called it a song of peace, others a blessing. But to Okoro, sitting alone outside their hut sharpening his spear, it had become the sound of mockery. He watched her from the doorway, her silhouette swaying as she sang, the moonlight tangled in her hair. Every note felt like a knife pressing against his pride. He remembered the way people smiled when she sang, how their eyes glowed with admiration, not for him, the hunter who brought them food, but for her, the woman who healed their spirits. His hands trembled. The spear in his lap gleamed dully, catching the firelight. A voice inside him whispered that a man must never be lesser than his wife, that a woman's song should not outshine a man's hunt. Nala, lost in her melody, did not see the darkness gathering in his eyes. Her voice rose higher, pure and full of love. She sang not for praise but for the peace of the world, for the children sleeping, for the tired mothers, for Okoro himself. She did not know that her song, meant to soothe, was stoking the last embers of his rage. When she finished, she turned to him, smiling softly. "Okoro," she mouthed, for the song had left her breathless. But the hunter did not smile back. His jaw tightened, and for a long time he said nothing. The silence between them thickened until it became unbearable. "Do you love your voice more than you love me?" he finally asked, his words sharp as broken stone. Nala frowned, not understanding. She reached out, touching his arm gently, but he pulled away. "Every man in this village listens to you," he spat. "Every night they wait for your song. They forget who you belong to." Tears welled in her eyes. She tried to speak, but her words were soft, tangled with confusion. "I sing for the spirits, Okoro. For peace, for the people." "Lies?" he roared, standing abruptly. His shadow loomed over her, massive and trembling. "You sing to be worshipped. You sing to make them forget me." The world seemed to hold its breath. The crickets stopped their song. Even the fire in the corner dimmed, its light flickering uncertainly. Nala stepped back, her bare feet brushing against the mat. "Please," she whispered. "You are my husband, my strength." But the word strength shattered something in him. In that moment, his fear and pride collided, forming a madness too deep for reason. His spear clattered to the ground as he reached for the knife on the table. Nala gasped, stepping backward, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. "Okoro, no." He lunged forward. His hand gripped her face, the other flashed with steel. The night exploded with her scream, a sound that ripped through the stillness, a sound that no one would ever forget. It echoed across the huts, startling the sleepers, silencing the dogs. And then, silence. Okoro stood trembling, blood staining his hands. Nala fell to her knees, clutching her mouth, the pain too great for tears. Her song, her beautiful healing song, was gone. When the villagers rushed to their hut, Okoro stood outside, his face blank, his body spattered with her blood. "The spirits," he said hoarsely. "The spirits have punished her for singing forbidden songs. I warned her." They looked past him and saw Nala lying still, her eyes open but her lips forever sealed. Fear gripped them, for no one dared question the wrath of spirits. That night, the moon hid behind clouds, and for the first time in years, the village slept without song. But deep in the forest, where no one could hear, the wind began to hum faintly, a melody broken yet unyielding, as if the earth itself mourned the silencing of Nala's voice. Nala lived. Though her blood had stained the ground and her screams had torn through the night, the gods refused to let her spirit leave the earth. When dawn came, she lay weak but breathing, her eyes half open, her lips sealed by raw, red pain. The healer women tended to her quietly, their hands trembling as they cleaned her wounds. They wept as they worked, for they knew what had been taken could never be restored. A voice was not just sound, it was life, identity, the bridge between the heart and the world. And Nala's had been cut away. When she awoke, the hut was filled with a suffocating silence. Okoro sat outside, staring into the distance, pretending to pray. Inside, Nala touched her throat and felt the emptiness within. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Her tears soaked the mat beneath her as her hands trembled in confusion. She looked toward the doorway where the light spilled in, as though the sun might answer the question that burned in her mind. Why? The days that followed were heavy. The villagers avoided Okoro's hut, whispering to one another about the punishment of the spirits. Some pitied Nala, others feared her. They said she must have angered the gods by singing sacred songs meant only for the wind. Okoro encouraged these whispers, his voice calm and mournful, as though he too were a victim of divine wrath. He walked with a solemn face, offering prayers to the ancestors, hiding the venom that had birthed his crime. Nala remained quiet through it all. She no longer tried to speak. Her lips moved, but the world gave her no answer. Yet inside her chest, songs still lived, songs that twisted and pulsed like wounded birds, desperate to be free. Sometimes, when the nights were long and the wind brushed against her ear, she felt those melodies stir, and her body would hum faintly, a ghost of what once was. She began to wander each morning to the riverbank. There, beneath the wide sky and whispering reeds, she would sit with her feet in the water and draw shapes in the sand, patterns of waves, spirals, and small dots that seemed meaningless to others but were her way of speaking to the world. The children who followed her at first laughed and called her mad, but when she looked at them with her calm, knowing eyes, they grew still. Her silence carried a strange weight now, something sacred and unsettling. It was near that river that her vision began to change. At first she thought the sunlight played tricks on her. Faces flickered in the ripples, old, weary faces she did not recognize. But as days passed, they became clearer. Spirits. The lost. The forgotten. Women whose voices had been silenced by cruelty, men who had died with truth buried in their throats, children who had been scolded into silence. All drifted within the river's reflection. They watched her, not with pity but with recognition. The first time one of them spoke, the words came not through sound but through wind. We hear you even without a tongue. The whisper wrapped around her like a warm hand. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her palm against the water, and for the first time since that terrible night, she smiled. The more she visited, the more the spirits gathered. They came when the moon rose, their whispers turning into a low hum that only she could hear. She began to understand their pain, their longing, their stories cut short by human cruelty. Their silence became her song. She was no longer just a woman without words, she was the vessel through which silence itself could speak. The villagers soon noticed strange things. When Nala walked by, the wind seemed to hush. When she sat by the river, the water shimmered even without the sun. Mothers said their crying babies calmed when they passed her hut. Some began to bring her small gifts, beads, fruits, flowers, as offerings, though none dared speak to her directly. Okoro, watching from afar, felt the unease grow within him. The woman he had tried to break had become something beyond his reach. Her silence was no longer weakness, it was power. The river listened to her, the wind answered her, and even the moon seemed to rise brighter when she appeared. Nala no longer sang with her voice, but the world had begun to sing for her. Her pain had become her strength, and in her stillness she carried the echoes of all who had been wronged. Though she had no words, her presence whispered the deepest truth, that silence, when born of suffering, could roar louder than any song. The nights grew longer after Nala's silence. The air itself seemed heavier, as though the world held its breath in mourning. The villagers went about their lives, pretending peace had returned, but something in the rhythm of the evenings had changed. The moonlight no longer shimmered with song, and even the crickets seemed cautious, their hum faint and uneven. The silence left behind by Nala's missing voice felt alive, as if waiting for something to return. For a while, Okoro believed he had succeeded in restoring order. Without her singing, people spoke of him again. The hunter, the strong one, the man who lived through divine punishment. He walked the village paths with false dignity, his shoulders squared, his chin raised. But beneath that shell of pride, something inside him had begun to unravel. Nights were no longer restful. Dreams came heavy and strange, filled with echoes and shadows that would not let him go. It started one evening when the wind shifted. Okoro lay beside the fire, eyes half shut, when he heard it, a soft, trembling hum drifting through the open window. The sound was faint, almost fragile, but it reached into his chest like a ghostly hand. His heart froze. It was her tune, the same melody Nala had sung to the moon on the night he silenced her. For a long moment he could not move. The hum grew clearer, swirling through the hut like mist. He leapt to his feet, grabbing his spear, shouting into the darkness. But when he stepped outside, the night was still. Only the leaves whispered. He told himself it was the wind. Just the wind. But when he lay back down, the song returned. This time it was closer, brushing against his ear, warm and gentle. the same way she used to sing when they sat by the river. He clamped his hands over his ears, but it didn't stop. The melody wasn't outside, it was inside him, vibrating in his bones. By dawn, Okoro's face was pale, his eyes sunken. He told no one what he had heard. But the next night it came again. The humming followed him into his sleep. It wove through his dreams, filling them with memories he could not escape. Nala's smile under the moon, her hands tracing circles in the sand, her voice rising like a tide. When he woke, his body was slick with sweat, and he could still hear the faint echo of her voice fading into the dawn. Soon, the whispers began among the villagers. Strange tales drifted through the air like smoke. Children said they heard a woman singing near the river at night, though no one lived there anymore. Fishermen claimed that when they cast their nets, the water rippled in rhythm to an unseen song. The old women who sat weaving baskets swore the wind carried her melody when it passed through their doorways. "The wind has taken her song," they said. "The spirits have given it wings." Okoro tried to laugh it off. "Foolish talk," he snapped whenever he overheard the whispers. "The dead do not sing." But when he was alone, his laughter withered. The song would find him, in the rustle of the leaves, in the splash of a dropped bucket, even in the pounding of drums during ceremonies. No matter where he went, no matter how loud the noise, her voice threaded through it all. Each night his fear grew sharper. The humming became words he could not understand, syllables that brushed against his ears like cold fingers. He stopped sleeping altogether, haunted by shadows that seemed to breathe with her rhythm. He began lighting fires around the hut, trying to drown out the sound with crackling wood. But the flames danced to her tune. The smoke coiled and twisted as though it carried her breath. One evening, desperate, he went to the riverbank where she used to sing. The moonlight shimmered on the surface, calm and endless. "Leave me," he shouted. His voice cracked. "I ended your voice. You cannot have mine." The only reply was the soft lap of water, and then, just as he turned to go, the wind sighed through the reeds, carrying her melody once more, gentle and mournful. Okoro stumbled back, trembling. The sound wasn't cruel, it wasn't vengeful. It was sorrowful, eternal. That was what terrified him most. It wasn't a ghost come to punish, it was love that refused to die. And love, he realized, could haunt more deeply than any curse. Sleep became Okoro's greatest enemy. Each night he tried to force himself into it, and each night it betrayed him, dragging him down into a world where time no longer obeyed the sun. The dreams began softly, with whispers of wind through trees and the murmur of the river. But soon the calm bent into terror. The water glowed like silver fire, and there, always there, stood Nala. Her feet hovered just above the river's surface, her hair moving like smoke, her eyes fixed on him with unbearable calm. Her mouth was stitched shut, threads dark and glistening, yet from her sealed lips rose a song that filled the air. It was not loud, yet it consumed everything, the rustle of the leaves, the hum of insects, even his heartbeat. Her song was sorrow and fury woven together, soft enough to break a heart, sharp enough to pierce a soul. Okoro would call her name, but his voice came out broken, swallowed by her melody. The river beneath her rippled with the sound, shapes moving beneath the surface, faces, dozens of them, their mouths open in silent screams. When he tried to look away, she would raise a trembling hand and point at him. The stitched lips moved, forming words he could not hear, and then the water would surge, pulling him toward her reflection. He would wake with a start, choking on air, his body slick with sweat, his hands gripping the mat so tightly that the straw broke beneath his fingers. Each morning brought new marks. Faint red scratches along his forearms, thin lines twisting into spirals. At first he thought they were insect bites or thorns from the forest, but when he washed in the river he froze. The patterns were familiar, swirls, waves, and dots, exactly like the ones Nala used to draw in the sand when she still had her voice. He stared at them, trembling, whispering her name though he swore he would never say it again. The marks deepened each night, no matter how tightly he wrapped his arms in cloth. He stopped hunting. He stopped speaking to anyone. The villagers noticed his eyes growing wild, his body thin, his steps unsteady. The children whispered that the hunter was losing his mind. Okoro didn't care. His world had become a cage built of nightmares. He began to fear the coming of dusk. As the sky dimmed, he would pace outside his hut, muttering prayers, clutching charms and dried herbs. When darkness finally fell, he would sit awake with a torch burning beside him, staring into the flame. But no matter how long he fought sleep, the moment his eyes closed, the river returned. Sometimes he would see Nala kneeling, her hands cupped around a small glowing shape, her tongue whole and alive, fluttering like a bird trapped between her palms. She would press it to her chest and the song would burst forth, shaking the dream world. Trees bent, waters lifted, and Okoro would fall to his knees, sobbing, covering his ears. When he woke, he could still hear her humming faintly, as though her voice had followed him back from the dream. He tried to silence it by shouting, by striking his head with his fists, but it only grew stronger. The walls of his hut began to whisper. The floor creaked in rhythm. Even his heartbeat seemed to pulse with her melody. Days turned into blur. He forgot to eat. He spoke to no one. His once proud figure, the hunter of Mbanza, became a shadow wandering the edges of the village. He would stand by the riverbank, staring at his reflection, expecting to see her there. Sometimes he did, her image shimmering just behind his, her stitched mouth smiling faintly. When he blinked, she was gone, leaving the ripples dancing. One night, as the dream swallowed him again, she reached out to him across the water. Her fingers brushed his cheek, cold as stone. "Enough," he begged soundlessly. But she only tilted her head, her eyes glowing like the moon. From her throat rose the same lullaby she used to sing to him when they were happy before the darkness. The sound tore through him. He woke screaming, clutching his face. On his cheek were 4 fresh scratches shaped like fingers. That night he did not sleep again. He sat staring into the darkness until dawn, rocking back and forth, the song still echoing in his skull. The dream would not end because the dream had already crossed into waking life. And Okoro began to understand that there would be no escape, not in sleep, not in prayer, not even in death, for he had silenced a voice the earth itself had chosen to remember. As the days bled into nights without rest, Okoro's face grew gaunt and his eyes hollow, shadowed by the fear of what he could no longer deny. The village had begun to change in strange ways since that cursed night. The winds that once cooled the evening air now whispered faint songs that carried Nala's rhythm. The elders gathered under the ancient Irako tree, murmuring of balance disturbed and spirits awakened. They spoke of the curse that comes when a man cuts the truth from the world, when he dares to silence the voice that speaks in harmony with nature itself. They called for Okoro to sit before them, the firelight reflecting off his trembling hands. He tried to steady himself, to hide the shiver that ran through him as the wind brushed past his ear, carrying a faint hum, so soft yet so clear it seemed to vibrate in his bones. "You have done something against the spirit of truth," said Elder Yuba, his voice grave as thunder. "The earth has memory, Okoro. The river listens. The wind carries the cries of those wronged. You cannot hide what has been done." Okoro's mouth opened, but no words came. The world seemed to watch him in silence. Even the fire hissed low, as though refusing to speak in his defense. He thought of the rituals that could cleanse him, the offerings that might silence the whispers. He had tried already, slaughtering goats, burning incense, bathing in sacred herbs, but every act seemed only to deepen his torment. The drums he beat to drown her melody became instruments of her return. With every strike, he heard her voice rise from beneath the rhythm, humming through the spaces between sound. Each beat made her song stronger, more alive. It was as if the spirits themselves drummed with her. The villagers began to avoid his home, fearful that her spirit lingered near him. Mothers pulled their children close when he passed. Hunters refused to join him in the forest. The once proud Okoro, who had walked tall with his bow across his back, now stumbled through days that melted into sleepless nights. He heard her in everything, the sigh of the wind through the trees, the trickle of water over stone, the low hum of bees near the flowering palms. Her song had become the voice of the world itself. Desperate, he climbed the hill that overlooked the river where she once sang. He carried palm wine, salt, and cowries, offerings to the spirits. He called upon the ancestors, his voice cracking like dry earth. "Take this curse from me," he pleaded. "Let her spirit rest." But the air was heavy and still. Then, just as he began to lower his head, a cool gust swept past him, circling him in a spiral. It was gentle at first, then suddenly fierce, pressing against his chest, whispering words he could not escape. "You silenced her, but her truth lives." Okoro fell to his knees. The earth beneath him pulsed like a heartbeat. He could feel it, the thrum of something ancient, something watching. He looked to the river and thought he saw her reflection shimmering on the surface. Her mouth was closed, but her eyes sang with sorrow and vengeance. The elder's warning rang in his ears. When a man silences truth, the earth itself remembers. He realized then that no ritual, no sacrifice could undo what he had done. Every living thing had become her instrument. The wind carried her whispers. The ground echoed her pain. The river hummed her song. The forest breathed her grief. And in every sound, every pulse of life, Nala's voice, though silenced, continued to rise. The spirits had chosen her as their vessel, and Okoro, the man who once envied the wind, was now condemned to hear it sing her song forever. The days after the elder's warning settled heavy over the village. The air seemed different, softer, charged with something sacred yet sorrowful. Though fear lingered in every corner, whispers of Nala's name began to rise again, carried on the wind like forgotten prayers. It began quietly, a mother humming to calm her crying child at dusk, an old man remembering her tune as he carved wood beneath the moon. The melody spread from lips to lips, from heart to heart, until the village itself seemed to breathe her song once more. Children gathered near the river, where Nala once sat tracing melodies in the sand. They drew the same swirling patterns she used to make, believing they could summon her blessing. Women would pause in their chores, their voices joining in soft harmony as they sang her fragments, broken verses that somehow still carried her strength. Even those who had once mocked her now found comfort in her music. Her silence had turned into something greater than words. It had become a language of memory, carried through generations like smoke from a sacred fire. Okoro watched all this from the edges of the village. His house had grown empty, his hearth cold. The villagers avoided him, not out of hate now but out of quiet fear, as if he no longer belonged to the world of the living. At night, he heard the humming rise again, coming from every direction. The tune was no longer just in his dreams, it was everywhere. The fields, the rivers, the very air sang of the woman he had destroyed. What once tormented him now seemed to belong to everyone else. Her haunting had left him, but not to bring peace. It had found a home in the hearts of the people. The old women said that Nala's spirit had refused to die because her voice had spoken truth. A voice born from love and pain cannot be buried, they said as they ground herbs under the moonlight. It finds its way into the wind. When the night grew still, some claimed they saw her near the river, her shape formed of mist and moonlight, swaying as though still caught in song. She was no longer seen as a ghost but as a guardian. The villagers began to leave offerings by the water, flowers, carved beads and small mirrors to reflect the moon, for they believed her soul sang to it still. One night, when the moon was full and silver poured across the thatched roofs, a young girl named Abani stood in the village square and began to sing. Her voice was soft, trembling at first, but the melody was unmistakable, Nala's lullaby, the one that had once lulled babies to sleep and calmed storms in men's hearts. Slowly, others joined her. The air filled with layered harmony, raw and beautiful, until it seemed even the trees leaned closer to listen. The song rose and rose until it reached the sky, and those who heard it swore the moon itself glowed brighter. It was as if Nala was there among them, smiling in the light. From that night onward, no one referred to her story as a tragedy. It became a tale told beside fires, a story mothers whispered to their daughters about strength and spirit, how no cruelty could silence truth forever. The children would play by the riverside, pretending to sing like her, and the men, once prideful, now bowed their heads when her name was mentioned. Her song had turned from a haunting into a hymn of justice. The village learned something in those nights of melody, that the voice of a woman, though cut from her body, could still echo in the soul of her people. The same Okoro who once silenced her became the proof of that power. His madness deepened as her story grew, for he saw her in every flicker of light, heard her laughter in every gust of wind. He could not step outside without the sound of her music pressing against his chest. Her voice was not meant to torment him anymore, it had left him for something greater. But his guilt made him the last prisoner of her song. As the years passed, the story of Nala became part of the village's heart. Songs were sung to the moon in her honor. During harvest festivals, when the drums echoed through the fields, people would pause at midnight to let the wind carry her tune. A moment of silence, followed by one shared hum that united them all. Women wore white cloths embroidered with patterns like the waves she used to draw, and elders told the children, "This is the song of the woman who taught the wind to remember." Even travelers who came from distant lands spoke of a village where the night air sang softly without a source. They said that if you listened closely by the river, you could hear a voice not born of flesh but of memory, its tone both sorrowful and strong. Her song had outlived her pain. It had outlived Okoro. And so, Nala's silence became the loudest truth of all, a truth sung by those who refused to let her fade. The haunting that once carried fear turned into a chorus of justice, echoing from generation to generation, reminding every soul that the voice of the silenced will always find its way home. The moon hung heavy that night, larger than it had ever been, casting a pale glow over the sleeping village. The air was thick with sound, not the usual night chorus of crickets and frogs, but something deeper, something human. a hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was Nala's song. It flowed through the leaves, whispered across the grass, and trembled on the surface of the river like light upon glass. Every corner of the world seemed alive with her voice. Inside his dark hut, Okoro sat trembling, his hands clamped over his ears. But it didn't matter. The sound was not outside, it was inside him. It thudded with every heartbeat, every breath. "Stop," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Please, stop." The song only grew stronger, swelling like a tide. The more he tried to drown it out, the clearer it became, soft and haunting, yet laced with the same sorrow he'd once ignored. He could hear her humming, her tone so close it felt as though she stood beside him again. He stumbled to his feet, eyes wide and glassy. His hut walls seemed to breathe with the rhythm of her melody. Shadows moved where there were none, and the air shimmered with the faint scent of river lilies, her favorite flowers. He knocked over a bowl of ashes and staggered outside into the moonlight. The village lay silent, but the song continued, winding between the huts like invisible smoke. Even the trees seemed to sway with its rhythm. He turned in circles, trying to find where it came from, but there was no single source. The song was everywhere. "Enough!" he cried, his voice cracking. He ran toward the forest, his feet pounding the earth like drums. The air seemed to follow him, thick with whispers and sighs that shaped themselves into her tune. Every step he took, the song followed, rising and falling like waves. The night birds that once paused to listen to Nala's voice now sang with her, their cries blending into the haunting harmony. The forest was alive, not with the sounds of nature but with her spirit. As he plunged deeper among the trees, the moonlight flickered through the branches, painting his face with silver lines. He tripped and fell to his knees, his palms sinking into the damp soil. The ground pulsed beneath him as if breathing. And then he heard it, a soft whisper carried on the wind, calling his name. "Okoro?" The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was her. He looked around wildly, his heart hammering. The whisper came again, this time closer, clearer. "You took my voice, but you did not take my song." He pressed his hands over his ears again, shaking his head. "You're dead. You're gone," he shouted into the darkness. But even as he spoke, the trees began to hum. The leaves rustled in a rhythm, the branches swayed like dancers. The river beyond the forest edge roared softly, carrying the melody forward. Her voice was no longer confined to the air, it lived in every living thing around him. The forest had become her choir. Okoro stumbled to his feet again, tears streaking his face. "What do you want from me?" he cried. His voice was raw, trembling. For a moment there was silence, and then the wind rose, sweeping around him in a violent spiral. It howled through the branches, cold and fierce, carrying her song with it. In that moment he could see her, not flesh and bone but a shape of moonlight and sound, her form shifting like mist. Her eyes shone with sorrow, not anger. Her mouth, once bloodied by his cruelty, now moved with perfect grace, forming the notes that echoed through his heart. "You cannot kill what is born of truth," the voice whispered. "You tried to silence me, but I became the wind you envied." The words struck him harder than any blow. He fell to his knees once more, his chest heaving. The forest around him shimmered with her presence. Every gust of air a note, every trembling leaf a lyric. He pressed his forehead to the ground, sobbing like a child. "Forgive me," he gasped. "Please forgive me." But the song did not soften. It did not stop. It rose higher, swelling like the tide before a storm. The trees bent with it, the earth trembled. And then, as if the night itself drew breath, the wind roared, a single, powerful note that filled the forest with unbearable beauty. Okoro screamed, clutching his chest as though the sound itself were ripping through him. The villagers awoke to the echo of that cry. It rose above the trees, mingling with the haunting melody that seemed to stretch all the way to the moon. When they found him at dawn, Okoro lay by the riverbank, his face turned upward, eyes wide open. The wind was still humming softly through the reeds, carrying the same song that had once brought peace to their hearts. No one spoke of what they saw that night. But from that day onward, whenever the moon was full and the wind passed gently through the trees, the villagers would swear they heard her voice, calm, eternal, singing over the river where her story began. And somewhere within that melody, faint but unending, was the echo of Okoro's final cry, a reminder that no silence, no cruelty, could ever destroy the song of truth. At dawn, when the mist still lingered low across the river and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and dew, a group of villagers found Okoro's body. He lay half submerged near the reeds, his face tilted upward as though staring into the heavens that no longer watched him. His eyes were open wide with terror, his mouth frozen mid-cry, the cry that had echoed through the forest hours before. The water around him was calm now, the only sound being the gentle ripple of current brushing against his still form. They said he must have chased the echo of her song into the river, drawn by something he could not escape. Some claimed they saw him running through the night, shouting her name, begging forgiveness from the wind. Others swore they heard laughter, soft, not cruel, almost tender, drifting across the trees before the forest fell silent again. When the elders came, they did not speak. They simply bowed their heads, for they understood what had happened. The earth had claimed its balance. The wind had finished its tale. They buried Okoro by the edge of the forest, far from the river where Nala's spirit was said to dwell. No drumbeats marked his burial, no chants of farewell. The people feared his name, but not from hatred, from awe of the justice that had unfolded before them. They knew he had been consumed by the same force he once tried to destroy. His grave was left unmarked, for the elders said, "Let the wind decide his remembrance." But the riverbank where Nala once sang became sacred ground. The villagers built a small shrine there, nothing grand, just a circle of white stones, a carved wooden figure of a woman holding her hands to the sky, and a few wind chimes that tinkled softly when the breeze passed. Every morning women came to lay fresh flowers there. Every night, the wind that swept over the water carried a melody, faint, soothing, eternal. Those who listened carefully could hear her song rising and falling with the rhythm of the river. It was said that even the fish swam slower near that spot, as if listening to her voice beneath the surface. Children were told her story as soon as they were old enough to understand words. Mothers would sit by the fireside and whisper, "There once was a woman named Nala, whose voice was so pure that even the moon leaned closer to listen. But one night, envy tried to silence her. And though her tongue was taken, her truth could not be killed." The little ones would listen wide-eyed, clutching their mother's arms, asking, "Did she really sing again?" And the mothers would smile and reply, "She sings still, my child." The wind carries her song to those who listen with their hearts. Her melody became a lullaby, soft, slow, woven from the same notes that once brought peace to her village. It was no longer just a tune, it was a memory, a legacy. Mothers hummed it to calm their daughters when storms raged, and when sorrow visited, it was sung to remind them that pain does not silence strength. Each generation learned it anew, never letting the song fade. Even travelers from distant lands passing through the village would stop by the river to hear the strange, haunting harmony that floated in the air. Over time, the story of Nala spread far beyond her home. Traders carried it across plains and mountains, telling of the woman whose song lived longer than her breath. They said her spirit had become one with the wind, that whenever injustice was done, her melody would rise, unseen but felt, a quiet force that stirred courage in those who heard it. In distant villages, women began to sing the same tune, though they did not know its origin. It was a melody that moved through generations, invisible as the breeze but unbreakable as truth. Seasons changed and years folded into decades. The shrine by the river remained untouched by time. Even when storms tore through the valley, the stones stood firm. The villagers said it was because Nala's spirit guarded the place. Some nights, they claimed to see her figure walking along the water's edge, a shape of light and mist, her feet barely touching the earth. The chimes at her shrine would ring softly, even when the air was still, and those who were pure of heart swore they heard her hum with them. The elders began a yearly festival in her honor, the Night of Voices. On that night, the entire village gathered by the river, carrying candles that reflected on the water like stars. No one spoke until the first wind blew across the reeds. Then a single drumbeat began, followed by the hum of Nala's song, sung in unison by everyone, men, women, children. It was a sound both mournful and healing. The villagers would close their eyes and sing not just for her, but for every silenced voice, every broken spirit that had been told to quiet itself. The song became a promise, that truth once born can never truly die. As generations passed, the song took on new meanings. For young girls, it became a hymn of freedom, a reminder that their voices, their choices were sacred. For mothers, it was a lullaby of protection. For men, it was a lesson written in melody, that love cannot survive where pride lives, and that those who destroy truth will one day be haunted by its echo. Even in times of conflict, when the village faced hardship or drought, they would gather and sing her song, believing it would bring peace as it once did when Nala's voice first touched the moonlight. But for those who listened deeply, the old, the wise, the dreamers, the song carried something more. Beneath its beauty was a whisper, a message from the spirit world. It spoke of balance, of memory, of how every act, kind or cruel, ripples through time. The river never forgot her tears. The wind never forgot her voice. And the earth, which had felt her pain, had turned her sorrow into song. Okoro's name faded from memory. Children no longer spoke of him except as the nameless man in the tale, the one who tried to silence truth. His grave vanished under vines and roots, reclaimed by the forest he once hunted in. The villagers said the earth had buried his story, while the wind carried hers forever. Some even believed that on nights when the air turned suddenly cold, it was his spirit wandering, still seeking the peace he could never earn. But when the wind changed direction, they said, it was Nala guiding it, keeping her melody alive. Centuries later, when no one alive remembered the faces of those from that time, the story still endured. A song hummed by an old woman as she rocked her grandchild. A rhythm drummed softly during a storm. A verse etched into the memory of a people who had learned that the voice of one woman could teach a village to listen. Even when languages shifted and traditions changed, the melody remained. Its notes traveled across generations like seeds on the breeze, planting remembrance wherever they landed. In one distant village, a young girl named Temi once asked her grandmother, "Where did this song come from?" The old woman smiled, her eyes soft with nostalgia. "It came from a river far away," she said, "from a woman who sang to the moon and taught the wind to remember." The child didn't fully understand, but she felt something stir inside her. A quiet pride, a warmth that told her the song was part of her too. And so it continued, the endless chain of memory, carried not in words but in music. The song became the voice of the voiceless, a hymn of endurance. It was sung at births, at weddings, even at funerals, moments of beginning and ending, all bound by the same truth. Nala's melody had become life itself, eternal, untouchable. On certain nights, when the world seemed too quiet, the villagers still swore they could hear it drifting through the dark, a soft hum rolling over the fields, brushing against rooftops, weaving through the dreams of sleeping children. The wind would sigh through the trees, and those who listened closely might feel the presence of something kind, watching, remembering. It was said that the moon still leaned close on those nights, just as it had long ago, when a young woman with a divine voice sang her song of peace. Nala's story was no longer just a memory, it was a spirit woven into the world itself. The trees swayed to her rhythm, the rivers carried her name, and the wind sang her legacy. And every time a mother whispered her lullaby to her daughter, every time a voice rose to speak truth against silence, Nala lived again. For truth once spoken, or sung, does not die. It moves. It breathes. It becomes the heartbeat of those who remember. And as long as the wind blows across the river, her song, the song of the woman who could not be silenced, will never fade.